Hi, folks. Welcome to Sunday's edition of the iWrite Radio podcast stroke videocast. There's a lot in the papers today. I should mention that Mr. Brewer's Sunday program still hasn't reappeared. Is that now no longer scheduled, or is it simply there's too much to talk about? I don't know. Extinction Rebellion, Ian McWhirter. Jimmy, you've got one have a pop about the COVID numbers, and Brexit is back on the horizon. But Stewart, you want to open up with something entirely different. Not listening, Stewart.
Yes, it's just an apology to one of... Sorry?
No, on you go.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Aldo there, Stuart here. It's for Kyle Mackey, and thanks very much for your comment. We'll treat it all in good time. Yes, you're right. He was pointing out that I made a mistake a couple of times about the red Labour on two shows recently.
That's the anti-immigration mug.
The mug, the Labour supports immigration controls. It's a bright red mug, and it was very controversial at the time. And I said it was it came out it was a Gordon Brown initiative, but what happened was it came out at the time of Ed Miliband, so that would be 2015, the election.
Yeah.
And although it was Ed Miliband who was leading the Labour Party at the time, Gordon Brown was going around saying things like British jobs people, and the red mug,
British jobs for British workers
was Gordon Brown with his big fist.
So Kyle's right and you're wrong.
And that's my excuse, Kyle. Kyle's right and I'm wrong, and I'm apologising on that basis. We will cover your other points, not today, Kyle, but we'll come back to. We definitely cover them again. And thanks very much for pointing them out, Kyle. Kyle Mackey.
And we shall also continue to get things wrong, because let's be honest, we're pretty good at that at times.
I can safely say that I've only ever been wrong about being wrong.
I'm sure you're probably accurate on that one, Norrie.
Well, let's move straight on to Extinction Rebellion, who have obviously failed miserably in their attempts to get in the papers by stopping the papers being printed yesterday, except, of course, they're all over the papers and the news. And so I'm sorry, but a very successful campaign. I don't think they've had as much coverage since somebody stopped a tube train.
Absolutely. I mean, smart. That was absolutely brilliant. I was looking at the Telegraph. Well, they stopped all the right-wing papers. They didn't come out. The BBC were showing pictures of this newsstands. Is it 3 across and 3 down, or is it 4 across and 4 down? They're the same in all the supermarkets, aren't they? And they were just only one paper. I think it was the gamut of a different printer. Anyway, they really did stop the paper. All the right-wing paper brought their paywall down today, and their digital front page, out of 10 articles, 7 of them were attacking the Extinction Rebellion. Apparently, the Johnson government's threatening to prescribe Extinction Rebellion as either as a terrorist organisation or organised crime.
What it really means is we're going to prescribe you because you're being effective.
That's all. I was going to sum up the intro and simply saying, my God, that worked. They really hurt the right-wing papers and the right-wing commentators. Go, boys.
Jimmy.
Absolutely. Aye, anything that's hurting the Express, that's hurting Murdoch, that's hurting the Telegraph, absolutely love it. And frankly, I think the tweet of the weekend about this was from the esteemed leader of the Brexit Party, or frog-faced shit-gibbon, as I described him this weekend. Farage, Extinction Rebellion do not tolerate any other view than their own. They shout down opponents and now prevent newspapers being delivered. This intolerance must be fought. How can Nigel Farage, with a straight face, talk about intolerance? He's made a whole bloody career upon it.
It always amazes me that the right-wing press jump on this freedom of expression, you know, stopping newspapers being printed, it's the end of the world. And they never look round and say, okay, well, what we'll do is we'll put a tenth of the money into left-wing, middle-of-the-road papers to show some real freedom of the press and balance. Freedom of the press in this country is about how much money you've got to print a newspaper. It's nothing to do with a level playing field or whatever. Extinction Rebellion will never get a newspaper on the newspaper stands, even if they produced one.
I mean, don't forget, it's not even British newspapers. Every single one of these newspapers are either owned clearly abroad, tax haven.
Well, it's all about protecting the right wing's platform. It's got
also
nothing to do with freedom of the press.
I thought I seen Diane Abbott getting interviewed on Sophie Ridge this morning. She made a point of pointing out that Extinction Rebellion's tactics were legal. You know what I mean? They blockaded a Printworks. None of these right-wing papers are complaining this morning about right-wingers blockading the Port of Dover at the weekend.
Well done, Jimmy.
I mean, it's purely selfish from the paper's point of view, but what the right wing done by blockading Dover is effectively legal as well. It's a tactic of protest. You can't get up in arms about one tactic of protest whilst not even mentioning another. Well, you can, but at that point you're going to be called out for the type of Ruth Davidson hypocrite that you are.
Jimmy, you're right. I mean, I was going to bring it up, and it's not just what you've just said, but the fact is that Sophie Ridge really pushed against Rebellion and she reacted very badly to Diane Abbott's trying to raise the Dover process by the far right. And as far as I could see, the BBC had the same, again, was all against Extinction Rebellion, but oh no, these right-wing people blockading Dover's fine.
Well, I mean, it's going to become more obvious as well as the attacks on the internet, on social media ramp up, because the right wing want to control that as well as the newspapers and television. I mean, we've got possibly 2 new right wing online TV stations coming, and they want to control, as we used to say on the left, we want to control the mode of production. They want to control the mode of information.
Absolutely. It drives them daft that people use the internet to spread information contrary to the spread they want. They want you to have their point of view, and that point of view to be the only one that's getting shoved down your throat. And it absolutely drives them wild that people are using things like Twitter and Facebook. And well, that's frankly, the new media is outstanding. I mean, it's not just the fact that you get different points of view, but you do also get to see extreme points of view, and you can filter them right out. You can go, oh, there we go. There's the Fruit Loops on that side. There's the Fruit Loops on that side.
Yeah.
Well, what about, did either of you catch Nick? And what was his name, the Deputy Prime Minister?
Nick Clegg.
Oh, Clegg. On getting, was it Andrew Marr was questioning him?
It was
about Facebook, and what was Facebook doing about dangerous messages and how quickly they could deal with them, and even
Facebook are quite happy to pay all the taxes asked of them, as long as the whole world agrees on the tax rate.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. They've got some interesting ideas, shall we say, on this year's American election. I think it's not a bad idea to stop all political ads in the last week, for example. But I've noticed myself, and I'm sure other indie fans will have noticed, the amount of paid advertising that gets targeted at me from the UK government in Scotland, from the new Scottish office, from that particular place. They must be spending a fortune at the moment, because clearly I am not necessarily their target audience, but because I post a lot of yes stuff, it's getting aimed at me. You know what I mean? I post a lot of stuff about Scottish politics, so clearly I've ticked a box on Facebook's algorithm that says, send them this one.
The New Street Lubyanka.
That's the one, the New Street Lubyanka.
Oh, like that's a good name.
Stick, Norman.
Yeah, that's better than Queen Elizabeth I's house.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I
that talking about newspapers, as we were, Ian McWhirter had a piece in the Sunday Herald today about Nicola Sturgeon's latest iteration of second independence referendum paper to be produced at Holyrood.
Mm-hmm.
I think it'd be fair to say he wasn't that impressed. This being, I think, about the third or maybe even fourth time some version of this has been threatened by Sturgeon. How are we
Yeah, I
feeling
think you're
about
right.
this, guys?
I think you're right, Norrie. I think he wasn't impressed, but I kind of detected throughout his piece a little bit of wishful thinking. I think he's desperate for the talking shop to continue, but I think he's also desperate for nothing to actually take place. I think he would love to convince, he'd love to keep stirring the pot with the SNP supporters. That's what his piece was basically trying to do, to antagonise both wings, people who think Nicola's got things on track and is generally, although slowly, moving towards a referendum, and others who think she's just doing nothing, has done nothing since 2015 when she got the leadership. I think it was just a stirring piece, if I'm honest, and I thought it was also a wee bit lazy. I think there are nuances in the way that Nicola Sturgeon spoke last week. For example, Peter Bell pointed out she did not mention at all Section 30. I see a determination still in Nicola Sturgeon to be the person that leads Scotland to independence. And whilst some in the Yes movement, in fact, quite a lot in the Yes movement, do not see that determination, I don't think we can write off the fact that her entire career has been predicated on bringing independence to Scotland. Maybe she has got cold feet. Maybe she'd never expected it to happen this quickly, to get to 57%, which is a fabulous number. But if we see, come the next election, come May next year, if we're looking at numbers at 60%, do any of us think that she's not going to take advantage of those numbers and have a right good go for it?
I think
That's a
I
good
do.
point.
At some point, the threat of another mandate isn't enough. She needs to find a plan B to threaten. I think we're at that point now.
I think Stewart, you posted the link again to Ian Lawson's piece, and that has some interesting, an interesting way of going about things for me. I don't think Nicola would be that bold, but it's certainly another thing to be thinking about, where he's suggesting, look, say to Boris, if you do not agree to a Section 30 with no strings attached, then I'm going to make next year's election all about Indy. And I will demand, if you wouldn't give us a Section 30, I will demand that the representatives of Scotland's people, i.e. the MPs and the MSPs, get together and we just go ahead and have a referendum.
Well, that would make Peter Bell happy. Peter Bell had examined what she'd already said in the last few days, and he wasn't as excited about it as I thought he would be. Ian Lawson, you're right, he brought up an interesting plan. Wings was right out on the edge of complete denial, which is why I thought Ian McWhirter was providing a bit of realism. In the absence of a radical populist like Alex Salmond, a history maker, it's hard to see this first minister ever taking the risk.
I don't think she can sit on the fence on this much longer. I think she has to come up with some way. I mean, I believe she's right to still hope she can get Section 30, but I think hope's not enough. She now needs some ammunition, some leverage. And the only way, I've been banging on about it for months, guys, but you just turn around and say, we're withdrawing from the Treaty of Union. We're prepared to renegotiate it, but it happens on Wednesday next week.
Well, there is of course
Go
precedent.
back into the
David Cameron done exactly that thing to Brussels.
Extinction Rebellion Act.
Stuart, you're
I'm
breaking
thinking,
up.
looking at the direct action. Am I? Oh, well, I
Yeah.
can go off for a rest if you like.
Oh, well, that's you back on. You must have
Technically.
just talked them into it.
I
I don't know what happened
have no
there.
idea why.
Could you please get a hold of your MI5 handler and get him to sort it?
Aye, tell them that they bugs in that flat are playing havoc with our podcast.
It's just not working. No, it's just that, of course, we started off by the impact of direct action that Extinction Rebellion have had. See some elements in the going down that road.
Well, it is a problem because, okay, 55%, it's great, but it's a balance. If it gets nasty on any level, people will pull their necks in.
Yeah, there's also because it's that close. There's also the tactic that seems to be becoming apparent in America, that they will tell us that the soft nose will come out against us so that they can fiddle the result. There seems to be an awful tactic this weekend. People are saying there are a lot of silent Trump supporters in America who are going to turn these polls around and put Trump back in the White House. And if the polls get much closer, I wouldn't put it past them to try and fix that result over there. I mean, we've had hanging chads and people voting twice before. I wouldn't put it past the Republicans to try and fiddle something.
Sure. He wants to whip up the violence. He wants to whip up the violence, doesn't he? I mean, the more the people protest and the more people there's violence on the streets and the more people get shot, that suits Trump.
Aye, some of his language is astonishing for a Western leader. I mean, I know he's fallen very far from the role of leader of the free world. I would suggest that the next 2 or 3 American presidents will struggle to retain that particular moniker. But for a Western political leader of any colour to speak in that way is quite astonishing. It's the first time in our lifetime that I've heard it.
Well, I think what really took me aback was the number of times he's denigrated America's war dead. For the commander-in-chief to come out with statements, I mean, he can think what he wants, but to come out with statements calling guys who gave their lives in the line of duty losers.
It's disgusting.
And look at there was an article the other day. Apparently, the likes of John Bolton, who was his Secretary of State, I think, was he? He's had a few, and very right-wing Bolton. But apparently, John Bolton's book, he suggests that Trump is not happy being in NATO. He wouldn't pull out of NATO. But if, let's say, one of the Baltic states got threatened by Russia, America would not rush to help under Trump.
Aye. It's weird. His whole admiration for Vladimir Putin's all a bit strange. I noticed that he won't come out and condemn Putin over the Navalny attack. Now,
no, he won't.
I'm quite suspicious about anything when they use the term Novichok. I mean, they indicate to you that only the Russians can make Novichoks, and then other people say, well, Ken, what, if you've got a bottle of bleach, some toothpaste and a 10-pence piece, you can come up with something pretty close.
Oh. Well, I've no doubt we'll be getting into the MAGA cult as we near the elections. COVID, Jimmy, you wanted to have a chat about the imbalance, shall we say, shown by the British government.
Yeah, I think we're going to see quite a lot of dead cats flying about this week because the numbers in England are frankly horrendous at the moment. More lockdown, more extensive lockdown for Bolton, who apparently now have 99 cases per 100,000. Now, they're introducing quarantine for countries at a level of 20 per 100,000 or round about there. So when Bolton's got 5 times a higher prevalence, they're getting something wrong. They're also missing their numbers on test and trace. They're missing 30%. They're getting 70%, whereas Scotland's over 99% on test and protect. We're seeing some really horrific numbers appearing in England. There was also the thing, I did write it down somewhere. 90% of people who are testing positive in Bolton at the moment are the ages 18 to 49. That's a complete turnaround from what we've seen in the past. So that's kind of explains why we're not seeing hospital numbers and deaths going up, because they always told us at the very start of this thing that 80% of people that got it would survive it. But we've seen some pretty creepy, odd things that COVID can do. You know, it mutates, it attacks people in strange and differing ways. What happens if this increase in younger people getting it? What happens if it then mutates and becomes far more deadly to people of a younger age? Are we going to see another mass death event? Because
what if it becomes chronic?
Exactly.
Because people are suffering now that had a dose of it, let's say in March and April, but they've still got serious.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that becomes
a bit like an AIDS situation, which for a time will just.
But that becomes a much bigger burden then.
A huge burden, and it becomes
a chronic tail to this will cost billions of pounds.
And absolutely hammer an NHS that isn't prepared for it, because right now, I would say the NHS is prepared for, probably well prepared actually, for a second wave. But if it did become chronic, they've not got either the funding or the facilities to look after thousands of people long term.
I notice the government is kind of tweaking its slogan "Back to Work," and it's becoming "Back to the Office," because the left kind of picked up on the fact that there's an awful lot of people who aren't back to the office but have never stopped working.
Exactly. There's millions of people who are working at home.
Yeah.
And to describe them as not working is frankly insulting.
Do we see any dramatic change in government policy vis-a-vis COVID? Or are they just going to go for the to hell with it? We're now prioritizing the economy.
I think they're crossing their fingers and hoping, mate. I think they are looking at, they'll obviously, well, my worry is that some people in London pretty much didn't care. But I would think the people that do care will be paying very close attention to countries where it hit first. You know, countries where it hit before it hit the UK, your Italy and your Spain, that had major issues, because if their numbers start going south, then you'd kind of expect England's numbers to start going south a few weeks later. Like, I
mean, we kind of know what's happening in Spain, but I haven't heard much about Italy recently.
Aye.
Are they dealing with it reasonably well?
They have the same problem with nightclubs and young people, basically, and you know the non-official hospitality as well. I was noticing that, you know, we've got to take a global perspective. Right now, it's totally out of control in India, you know, which is one of the, it's a huge percentage of the world's population. You know, it's 15 to 18% of the world population, and it's completely out of control. It's out of control in Brazil. And is it under control in the US of A? I don't know.
I don't think so.
There's very little. It's noticeable that the reporting of COVID in America has kind of dropped off the radar. It's now anything that we get on European press about America, it's all about the election.
Yeah. Talking about which, Brexit has reared its bonny head.
Aye.
Stewart, you heard the rumour.
Well, which one do you want to know about?
Barnier.
Yes, Barnier. I spotted something on social media that said that Barnier was actually being sidelined rather than officially replaced by the Europeans. I'm not exactly sure who. That might have been in the Daily Express, in which case it's obviously a lie. But it might tie in with another story that appeared yesterday, and apparently the mainstream of is going to the right. Now, he's got an election in 2022 to be
Stuart,
re-elected president. So it must be every 5 years there or something.
Stuart, could you run that again? You broke up right in the middle of it. We missed the point of it.
Aye.
Well, things are happening in France as well. And Macron is under attack from the mainstream for swinging to the right to line up with, like how the Conservative Party adopted the language of the Brexit Party to get elected in 2019. The suggestion is Macron will adopt the language of the right to get re-elected in 2022. En sauvage or something is the right-wing dog whistle word in France. It means savage.
I wouldn't be surprised at that, because again, it'll be Marine Le Pen that's his main opposition for the presidency. And frankly, if he tacked a little bit to the right, I'd expect him to win that election relatively easily. But it depends just how far right he's willing to go, because I don't think he's not a right-wing man. He's kind of a libertarian. He's not going to do a Boris and just embrace it completely. But I think they might very well be right. I think he will tack right a wee bit.
I remember at the last elections, everybody was worried about Le Pen, and she got stuffed when it came right down to it.
Yeah, but she got to the final, and she will get to the final runoff again. The way the French presidency works, it ends up with two of them. And the danger is that when it ends up a two-horse race, that one day that extreme right-winger, she's basically the National Front, that one day she could win.
She's pro-Brexit, isn't she? She's anti-EU, Le Pen.
Aye, she is anti-EU. I tell you what, Norrie, talking of rumours, I heard a kite being flown on a couple of shows this morning about the fishing industry, where, and it's the first, it wasn't the official government sources, it was mouthpieces, Ian Dale and somebody else that came out with it. But the one that they're flying is that a far larger share of the quota and continuing access to EU markets could be enough to solve the fishery problem. Now, that is nothing like what the Brexiteers promised. They promised independent coastal state.
But what that actually means, that is crazy speak. Stuart's just disappeared. That's crazy speak for the 5 big families in Scotland will keep their fishing rights and to hell with everybody else.
Aye, well, the worry is a larger share of the quota doesn't necessarily solve anything, because particularly in England, large percentages of that quota are sold to Dutch and Spanish boats.
Yeah.
So if we're still seeing a lot of Dutch, Spanish and French boats in British waters, have you solved the problem with the fishermen? No, you bloody well haven't.
Well, I think I always thought there'll be some sort of agreement on fishing that will be spinnable. The negotiation will not be about percentages of stock, etc., etc. It'll be about how it's worded. It'll
be about British control over the waters and a far bigger say in how quotas are apportioned, and we'll still be able, because at the end of the day, we need access to the EU market. It's no use having quota if you can't sell it somewhere, is it?
Well, the other solution is to go for a long-term agreement, which would placate Europe, I'd say a 10-year agreement, which gets you through 2 general elections without having to argue with the fisher folk of the northeast, which is
I'm not sure the Europeans would go for 10 years though, mate. I think they want an annual one. I think they would maybe go for
No, they don't. They want a long term. It's the Brits that want an annual one. The British want to be able to use it as leverage each year. So they want to be able to pull or give quota depending on what they can get out of Europe for it. And the Europeans do not want that. They want a long-term agreement.
Right. Well, I as we say, mate, it's a tiny part of the UK economy, fishing, but it's massively important in terms of the visuals of how we see, how the Brexiteers see freedom from Europe.
And it won't matter if there's an agreement on fishing. It'll be a stick that we, the SNP up in Scotland, will beat the Tories with. It won't actually matter unless the Tories get a total control. It'll be portrayed as a betrayal.
Aye, and the thing is down there though, mate, it wouldn't matter so much because the one person who would use the stick that we can use to beat the Tories up here, Nigel Farage, he's not going to be up against them. They've not got a general election coming. They've not got any European elections coming.
Yeah.
And frankly, the Brexit Party has made no real inroads into local government. So the local government elections, it wouldn't matter either.
Well, the 80 seat majority means fishing is really irrelevant.
Yes.
Its impact on the economy is very, 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 very small. So it's a spin operation.
And if they can, the amount of Tory rebels that might take offence to any deal in fishing isn't large enough to cause them parliamentary problems.
Exactly. I mean,
and the fact that, let's be honest, Tory rebels, there's always a percentage of them that can be bought off with a job or a title or some money, basically.
And even the 40 Brexiteers they used to speak about, plus the Scottish MPs, doesn't dent their 80 seat majority.
Exactly. He's got enough of them 40 rebels, mate, either in government or on the government benches and some minor places within government that he's got them tied. They've got to vote for that bloody deal because they're collective responsibility.
We've got negotiations restarting, not this week, next week?
Yes, and Mr. Frost has been posturing again in the Sundays. I think that maybe be one of the dead cats I was talking about this week. We'll hear plenty about how they're going to tie Europe up in knots in this round of negotiations.
But I think this next round is kind of the last chance saloon, isn't it? How many last chance saloons have we banged the doors open on now?
Aye. Well, we're into September now, mate, and it's pretty much, Europe have pretty much told Britain that things have to be kind of sorted by the end of this month, or certainly by the middle of October, so they can get through the various parliaments that it needs to go through before December the 31st.
Well, it'll be interesting. I think on that note, we'll call it a day. I'm not quite sure what happened to Stewart there. I take it his broadband went down. It
was maybe his connection, mate, because it was kind of jumpy, the whole program, wasn't it?
No doubt we'll catch up with him tomorrow. But thanks to Stewart Lochhead. Thank you, Jimmy Hutton. I'm Norris Stewart. Thanks for listening, folks. And we're always happy to hear your comments, as Stuart's apology at the beginning of the program pointed out. But we'll be back tomorrow. We'll see you all then. Cheers for now, folks.